Hello and welcome to the Undercut podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jesse Billington, and we are back for the 2024 Formula One season. I say we, I am joined by the full flotilla of hosts alongside me this evening. I've got Thiemo Albus Daly and I have a mostly healed Ellie Mae Taylor. How are you both?
I'm wonderful, thank you very much. I'm going to use that bit of the script you glossed over, and I'm gonna channel it instead. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thought that was more aimed at Ellie Mae, really.
Whichever one of you answered first, really.
How are
I
you,
wasn't
Ellie Mae?
sure, but you can be me if you like, Jesse.
It seems a little bit painful at the moment. I'd rather not.
It is a little, but I'm good, thank you.
Good to hear. And are you ready to dive into what will be a sort of fairly whistle-stop tour of the news and all the things that you need to know ahead of the 2024 F1 season?
It feels a little bit like the last podcast. Here's the good, here's the bad, here's some of the ugly.
Yeah, we've got a bit of a mix in this one. So we'll dive in with the obvious, actually, as our opening category. And Madrid joins the F1 calendar in 2026 as yet another street race. Barcelona is still on the grid alongside Madrid in some reports. But yeah, their general consensus is we're getting another street race as the continual Formula Eification of F1 goes on. Any initial thoughts on that?
Do we need two races in Spain?
Do we need three races in America?
Yeah, but at least,
Arguably more three races in America than two races in Spain.
yeah, because America's huge.
Yeah, but also America likes to think it has a big market share of like watching F1, but I think I'd need to check the numbers, but I'd argue that maybe Spain has an equally similar level of fascination with it, especially given there are two Spanish drivers on the grid.
Then I'd say go to a proper actual track in Spain and upgrade one rather than making a street circuit if you're absolutely hell-bent on going down that route. I mean, I still don't think we need two Italian Grand Prix because, and if we do, why are we not going to Mugello instead of Imola? But that's a separate conversation. But Madrid, we've seen the renderings for the track and all the rest of it was supposed to look like. I do not care. I mean, if someone gives me free tickets, I will go. But aside from that, I may watch it on TV, but by that point,
It looks a little bit too tight and too narrow to be any fun in certainly the modern F1 cars. 2026, they're supposed to be smaller, but I think they're going to have to be sort of 1990s smaller to actually be any good at going side by side around this circuit.
I
and it
would
seems a little
rather,
cruel to do it to Barcelona after the last couple of years where it's actually been slightly better racing there than we've had for a long time. It's like, we're going to reward you by going to Madrid.
I'd rather that they would go to Portugal.
Hmm,
Yeah, I think Portimao would be
agree
the
with that.
ultimate compromise here of simply going to a completely different country. But there is some good news when it comes to retaining proper circuits on the F1 calendar. Both Suzuka and Silverstone have signed contract extensions. Suzuka is there until 2029 after signing a 5-year extension, and Silverstone will be around till 2030. So praise the F1 gods indeed. Moving on to the more obvious driver news as well, of course, there is Hamilton to Ferrari in 2025. There is a podcast in our catalogue about that, so go and listen to that one after this. I think it was the one we kicked off our latest season with Ellie Mae and I. Charles has also signed a contract extension with Ferrari, reportedly for 5 years, but the actual length of it hasn't been confirmed. They're being a bit shady about this one. Albon is also reported to be staying at Williams in 2025. Nothing on this has been confirmed. It's all so far been intent to stay sort of things, but I think Williams have been
James
early.
Vowles seems pretty sure of himself when he says it, though.
Yeah, I think they want to try and put that one out in the field of operations ahead of anyone making big plays for that Mercedes seat in 2025. So
And
we'll
it's
see.
also one of the weird things that Ellie Mae and I actually agree on in terms of he would be better to stay there and just build the team out with them. And I think it would be a better story in the long term for that to just be. Wouldn't that just, it's just so much nicer than him just either going back to Red Bull do what we expect them to do to him again, or he goes somewhere else and someone else goes to Williams and makes his dream come true there, and he just misses out through no explicit fault of his own.
I think that it's such an exciting time for Williams at the minute, and they're going through a whole reshuffle of how they do things. This is the perfect time for a driver like Alex Albon to really sort of cement his place within the team and mold it to how he wants. If he went to somewhere like Mercedes, he'd probably have to mold to them, whilst he can work alongside Williams and grow together.
Williams is undergoing huge amounts of changes and updates at the moment, so it sort of makes sense to have those updates form around him and sort of really push forwards with making it his team. He's seen how teams work built around a driver, phenomenally Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, and he's got a chance to do that with what is an engineering powerhouse, a team that can actually put together something that is good. And this year they are striving to put together something good, which is finally integrating the LCD screen for the driver information onto the steering wheel of their car. So first time for them doing that one, which is interesting.
However, I would like to throw one left field spanner in the works as an idea and a bold prediction that I don't think will happen, but it'd be interesting if it did. If Albon does go to Mercedes, who would you like to see jump into that Williams? He can build it around them. Carlos Sainz would be interesting there, and he gets a championship with Williams at some point in the not too distant future.
I'm not against that at
He would
all.
look better in their race suits this year than they do, in my opinion, as well. It just seems that colour scheme works better for him, I think.
It would be interesting to see him in a Williams, especially a Williams that is starting to come good. Other
Let's see
con
what you could. Well, let's see what a driver his caliber can get out of that car, rather than someone who's still learning the craft and finding his potential. Here's someone who knows his potential and could
yeah.
really bring them forward.
I mean, my other
Somebody,
argument was going to be like an O'Sullivan or I want to say
They
Colapinto if it
can
was
be a
Williams
teammate.
tied.
They can be,
Yeah.
yeah, they can be a teammate.
Or hell, even a Chadwick who is still tied to Williams.
Signs and Fleur, not Fleur. Sorry, getting away. Signs and Chadwick for 26.
It'd be an interesting pairing.
it's not a driver that I'd like to move to Williams, but I would like Adrian Newey to go back there.
I knew you were going to say that.
It'd be interesting to see what he can do with a Williams that's revolutionizing itself. And if they can keep up this performance growth as well, there'll be a scope for him to do interesting things as their prize money increases. But that's all speculative. Things we do know, Lando Norris has extended with McLaren. He's confirmed to be staying with the team until at least 2026, matching his fellow teammates' contract. And
So
there
including
is
2026 or until 2026?
Including
including 2026,
Yeah.
yes. So he'll be racing for them until the end of the first year of the new regulations, which would be interesting. I think that gives him a chance to sort of evaluate things under the new regs, which would be interesting. And speaking of ongoing contracts, Williams and Mercedes have signed a contract extension until 2030. This will see them move on together past the 2026 regulation change. And it's a no-brainer, really, as Mercedes are very much a known quantity, and no doubt Mercedes will appreciate two extra cars providing data on their engines, especially as they're losing Aston Martin somewhere down the line, who will be taking on Honda engines. Let's we not forget that. So yeah, interesting stuff there. Another quick point of note is, of course, Haas's technical director. This is something we did touch on when we covered Gunter Steiner leaving the team. Simona Resta has left the team, and it's currently unclear if he's going back to Ferrari or not. And this came out at the point that, like I said, Steiner's contract was not being renewed. So there is a podcast we have here with the Haas chap. Go listen to that one if you want to. But the whole thing of sort of producing quite a lot of free agents, and Simone Resta being quite good if you give them the appropriate tools, and it just seems that Haas never did.
Petition to make Haas Chap their new technical director? Or has that post already been filled?
Knowing Henry as I do, I'd be reluctant to put him forward for that position. So we'll move on from that dangerous territory to some equally dangerous territory where I'm going to say exactly what I've written on the script and no more, which is, of course, the Horner and Red Bull investigations. And like I'm going to say exactly from the script, the investigation is still ongoing at this point, and the true details as to what triggered it are varying, and it's tricky to ascertain the veracity of it. We just want to say that we are aware it's happening. We are keeping our finger on the news pulse, but until something concrete is out there, we're not actually going to put anything on record. I know that we'd all like to speculate on it, but speculation is not good journalism. So we'll move on to one of the main points, which is actually a shift in people at the top of the FIA. And Tim Goss has left his role as the single-seater technical director at the FIA. So this is one of the people that would have been in charge of leading technical regulations and specifications for all the single-seater regulations from F1 down to things like F4 and F1 Academy. And Tim is the third big figure to quit the FIA through the winter. He follows sporting director Steve Nielsen and the FIA's Commission for Women head Deborah Meyer. Nielsen is to be replaced by Tim Malyon, the FIA's safety director, who has been in the role since 2021. Nielsen has only been in the role since January last year and left in mid-December, so only did 1 year in that role, which is quite an interesting theory. Tim Malyon was previously an engineer at Formula E at BMW. Prior to that, he'd been the head of engineering at Sauber. He's also worked with BMW and DTM and been an engineer at Red Bull. Niels Wittich will be continuing on, though, as the race director for F1, reporting to Malyon overall. Tim Goss, the man who started this all off, moves to Visa Cash App RB as their chief technical officer.
It's pronounced Toro Rosso.
It's pronounced Minardi.
It's pronounced Minardi.
Yeah. Alan Permain, yes, he of Alpine, is also now the racing director for Toro Rosso, and Guillaume Catayani of Red Bull, McLaren, and Lotus history steps up as the deputy technical director at the team. He and Goss and Permain will all be reporting to Jody Eggington, the team's technical director, and their principal, Laurent Mekies, who many of you will recognize from the Ferrari pit wall. So it's all go, weirdly enough, with the FIA and Alpha Tauri / Toro Rosso / Minardi, but at the same time, the FIA have also taken on Alpha Tauri as their clothing
new fashion brand. Yeah. I feel like for this part, I want you to put on the YouTube version of this podcast one of those FBI style charts where everything moves around and connects. I want to see that, and then Alpha Tauri just off the side of fashion.
Yeah, I was planning on doing a big sort of spider's web red string round pins on a corkboard diagrams to go with the graphics on this. So if you're watching this on the YouTube, probably best look away from your work and look at the YouTube for a second. Remember to click like and subscribe while you're there to try and fully graphiциze, explain everything I just whistle stopped through. But the overarching thing from this is, do you not think it's weird that Red Bull, the overarching company that owns Red Bull Racing and Visa Cash App RB, has also owns Alpha Tauri clothing, has now sort of got its finger in two team pies and is a sponsor of the FIA, the non-profit organization that runs the racing series its two teams sit in? It just seems like they're a little bit too close.
It does.
To me, conflict of interest.
Yeah.
I would have, it was very unethical. If another, I would. Yeah, I think. Whenever you have to do have you ever had to do ethical courses for
bits and pieces of it with media? Yeah.
Yeah.
Failed miserably, yes.
Yeah, I would be really uneasy about this, but
it kind of comes across as this is the sort of thing one might accuse Ferrari of, but with no proof, and it just seems like something they would do, but you could never really pinpoint it, whereas this seems very much more out in the open and a bit more under for scrutiny. Then it's kind of like, are we sure none of this crossover is bad? For lack of a clear way of saying that, because it's just such an odd kind of, you're not sure what you're accusing anyone of. You're just like, this seems suspicious.
The best phrase I can use for it is cronyism. It's just happening to know a guy, and it was sort of Italian mobster sort of stuff of I know a guy, and
but minus the Italian flair for it, so it seems more dodgy.
Apart from Alpha Tauri, which is an Italian clothing brand, but yeah.
And sort of Minardi,
Italian, Toro Rosso is pseudo-Italian as well. The whole thing just seems a little bit too close and incestuous with itself to be good for anyone involved. So if we're going to speculate on anything tied to Red Bull, this is the one I want to speculate on, because it could have really big ramifications if the whole ball of thread comes undone all of a sudden. And it just sets you on edge a little bit if you sort of go, I don't want to think there's something going on here, but it smacks as though there could be.
We are unfortunately living in a time where suspicious timing and announcements and people moving around and how F1 and Liberty have operated in recent years makes us think that there's more to it, even if there's not. It's just that overall feeling, and kind of sheds a bit of an interesting light on all of their PR systems, because you'd think that if there was absolutely nothing to worry about here, they would make it absolutely clear and just quash anything, and we wouldn't even be thinking this in the first place. But the fact that we are having this discussion has some interesting connotations to it.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of, if this was all completely clear, you would have made it completely clear. But you've just sort of put out the most sort of flim-flam, sort of surface level press releases and not really wanted to go too far into why a former sponsor of one of your major stakeholder teams is now your clothing sponsor and you're a non-profit organization. What are you doing, Mohammed Ben Sulayem? Put down the FIA. This isn't your plaything. Anyway, moving on from that, there is, of course, some important news that you'll probably want to know about moving into the season, which is actually a bit more relevant to the racing action you'll see on track. And crucially, there is a new structure to race weekend orders, or specifically sprint race weekends. And yay, if you're not a fan of sprints. Friday will still feature FP1 and a qualifying session, but it will now feature the sprint qualifying. Saturday will then have the sprint and Grand Prix qualifying, and then there'll be the Grand Prix on Sunday. And I think this is interesting because what it means is there'll be no pushing in the sprint. Drivers and teams won't be really challenging to do anything in the low point stakes of the sprint because they've then got to qualify for the big race. There's no point binning it on the Saturday morning if you've then got to rush and rebuild your car to actually get a good qualifying place for the big points paying Grand Prix. So they just sort of neutered the sprint, something that they'd managed to make vaguely exciting has now become completely neutered. Do you think this is a good change?
I liked it when the sprint was consolidated over the Saturday because it almost felt like a separate event. And like you said, it sort of adds an even bigger element of risk during the sprint. If you crash, your weekend will be completely over, whereas previously you almost had a clean slate on Sunday to try and get some points. I don't really know why they've done it.
I can only assume because it's not changed how many competitive sessions there are across the weekend or which order they're in. It just means that you sort of run sort of practice, then all of the sprint bits, then all of the Grand Prix bits sort of consecutively, as opposed to doing practice and then going, wait, which qualifying session is this for? Oh, this is for the Grand Prix. And then we're doing qualifying for the sprint and then the Grand Prix. So at least I think someone's gone, well, why don't we just do it all in the sequence that it needs to happen? But not
Well, that was what I was going to say. It looks better from from not a logical perspective necessarily, but from a visual perspective
yeah,
of, oh yeah,
you
sure,
write it
you
out
would do that in that
sequentially. Yeah.
order. That makes more sense. But it still amuses me that we've been doing this for a number of years now, and they've still not figured out that if you're having to do a sprint weekend, that the best way to do it is still how F2 and F3 do it.
Yeah.
And I don't get why that isn't just what they're adopting and how long it's going to take before they run out of all these other permutations and ways to do it instead of just doing that or, the decent thing and just scrapping it.
Yeah, there's only so many ways in which you can run this, short of actually starting
Next
with the Grand
next year,
Prix and going
Grand
backwards.
Prix on Friday. Okay, we had the
Yeah,
same idea.
we're both going to the same point. You start with the Grand Prix and then you qualify for the next weekend or something later on.
Sunday practice.
Yeah.
It's important.
That would add jeopardy though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so Friday,
Just
you
go
wake
straight
up,
in.
boom, go practice, Grand Prix, great. Then you sort of do maybe like a sort of wind down session to consolidate the data. Saturday you have as the sprint, and then Sunday is a load of practice, is the qualifying for the next race. So you've then got a week,
which is a sprint.
which is a sprint. So you've then got a week of sitting there going, didn't do a very good job there, didn't do a very good job there. Shit, I'm starting 14th. Why the hell did I do that?
But it's okay because no one else will know if they've done a good job or not because everyone's going to be so very confused as to what's actually happening and what's worth anything.
And that'll be exciting and people will tune in. They won't pay attention to the fact that the whole thing is slowly being owned by Red Bull.
You've got to think though as well, if you did qualifying in on a different circuit, some cars are faster in certain circuits. So then you could go to the next circuit and whoever is qualified in pole position may have like the third fastest car that wouldn't have ever qualified pole position. So it could end up actually being a really interesting race because everyone's mixed up.
Well, yeah, this is great.
I would say whichever race you do before Monaco, if I'm Haas or one of these places, I would make sure that the previous race and pit for that, and then like I'm staying here.
Yeah, if you're Haas, all you've got to do is hope that the race before Monaco is like Austria or Spain, and you can just turn everything up to the max because they're circuits that sort of seem to suit the Haas. Turn everything up to 14, party mode, the lot of it. And then you've got a week to rebuild the gearbox that you've obliterated into a million pieces as you cross the line, setting a lap record around.
Also seems like the kind of thing where nothing against K-Mag or Hulk, but you do what James May did and just, oh, I'm driving in this quarry, and then just pull over to the side. Other person gets in, does a mega quali lap. Okay, pole. Wow, I don't know where that came from, guys. I'm just really fast today. It's incredible.
Yeah, the Top Gear trick of replacing your driver with a slightly faster driver. Anyway, we'll move on from that round of speculation to some more new rules that are being implemented across F1 weekends, which are crucially the new DRS rules. And in addition to some other rules about use of DRS, how it's actually triggered are being changed. Crucially, the race director can now trigger DRS 1 lap after the start of the race instead of the current 2 laps grace period. This also applies to race restarts after a safety car period. And I think this is interesting because what someone's done at F1 is sat down, rewatched all of last season and gone, well, it took Max Verstappen a lap and a half to get out of DRS from the guy behind him at safety car restarts. What if we only gave him a lap? Because then at least you've got a chance. You've got 1 lap, Max Verstappen, to get 2 seconds away from the field.
Isn't this another rule that they've taken from F2 and F3, I want to say as well? I feel like they had this already. So again, it's like, okay, you've seen it works over here. You've applied it. It's brilliant. But yeah, you're getting there. You're getting there.
They're slowly figuring out that F2 and F3 can work as their sort of little mixing pot of concepts and ideas and picking and choosing the right ones. But equally, this one, when you read it through the aspect of wanting anyone but Max Verstappen to win a fucking race.
Oh yeah, it's a fun way.
So much more of a practical tool because you can just go, yeah, it's just taken away half of Max Verstappen's sort of get away from the field time.
The thing is we'd need to know how much he was pushing on those laps as to whether he easily got that 2-second lead.
You suggested he won the entire 2023 championship sandbagging a little bit.
Wow.
Because if he was, A, very impressive, B, we're in for a hell of a 2024 if he was.
All right, my expectations are already low.
I'd also like to know whether this is up to the discretion of the race director or not, whether it's his choice to do it or not, because you've got to think, in some cases, sometimes a safety car breeds safety cars. So I almost think DRS in those situations would not go play well with that.
Jeddah sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of...
you don't need DRS for that to go wrong, though. They can do that without it. So why not just add DRS into the mix at that point and just have a bit more fun with it?
I think this is why it's worded as can now trigger. I don't think it's must or will. I think it's can. I think they have the
petition to rule that as a change immediately and be must.
Yeah.
Let's do it properly.
So Wittich can now sort of muck around a little bit with as and when he hits the DRS go button, but we'll see how that one plays out. Okay, moving on from some DRS news to something that's actually just breaking while we're recording, and this will probably be our final point because we've sort of had to ditch one of them because it turned out to be a bit of a non-point. It was in fact just an announcement that the news on power unit regulations is staying very much the same. The big news that is breaking is Callum Ilott is heading back to IndyCar. He had sort of left it to head over to do WEC for a bit, but turns out he's heading back over and joining McLaren for a little while they're sort of waiting for one of their drivers to get better. Who was it that had the bicycle accident recently? Was it Malukas?
Is it Renus? Yeah, David Malukas.
David Malukas, yeah. Fell off his bicycle. What is it with motorsports drivers falling off bicycles and injuring themselves just before the season starts?
It's kind of amusing that that's how they get injured, though. It's not the actual job of...
It's not the job. It's just
motorsport.
It's
a bicycle.
But anyway, ruined his wrist. He's currently undergoing medical treatment, getting back ready for the season. So what McLaren over in IndyCar have had to do is phone up a Callum Ilott and go, "Yo, you up?" And yeah, they are. There's your final piece of news. Callum Ilott will join the Arrow McLaren IndyCar team in Homestead, I think that's Flagstaff, Arizona, this week to test with the team. The team will announce who will pilot its third car in St. Petersburg in due course, because St. Petersburg,
hopefully him,
their first race of the season, and comes up very soon.
He does look good in orange.
He does. He looks quite at home in the car and happy to be there. Of course, he is racing at Porsche, or is it Jota in WEC this season? I can't remember off the top of my head. It's Jota. It's the Jota Porsche. Yeah. So he's over in WEC the rest of the time, but he's returned to IndyCar for a little bit while someone else's Audi goes away.
He is the new Hulk.
He is. He is the super sub, but doing it trans sporting classes. There we go. That is all we've got time for on this rather jumbled and very high speed preview of the 2024 F1 season, or certainly the bits that you need to know going into it. We'll be back after testing with some predictions for the season to come. And this is a good point to remind you that if you head to our social media pages, you can find the link to take part in our big 2024 predictions game. There is a link to it. You can fill out the form, and it's essentially the three of us as the hosts versus the amassed intelligence, inverted commas, of the general public. And we'll be challenging.
Are we competing with them?
Yes, yeah, we're going against the average general public intelligence when it comes to predictions.
I may have to rewrite all of my predictions because
Don't
I've just
worry.
gone in with this will be an interesting season if any of this happens, but I will get 0 points.
Hang on, are they written down already? Oh, they are.
Yes, I did this. I did this earlier. I just went a bit silly
Don't worry.
because I don't think
Ooh.
much is going to happen this year.
Don't worry. The team has me.
Yeah, but
That's true.
we're not competing as a team. We're competing individually to try and beat the public.
Do you want to change
No.
that?
Yeah. So Thiemo can still lose to the public. You can still beat the public. So
I want to see if I can get negative points.
if I score it like I did last year, there is a very real chance you could. Um,
I'm going to put the no negative thing that you can get
it's
from F1 Fantasy and put that under mine.
I won't be accepting that as like a wild card play. We have also set up an F1 Fantasy League, so there will be details floating around somewhere on our social media feeds to go and join that. Thiemo, it's your turn to make a team as well for the podcast's cumulative layout. So I'll give you some details on doing that
Oh,
one.
we're getting a team each for that. Excellent.
Yeah, we're getting a team each for that one on the podcast one, plus obviously our own individual teams. So you can compete with us as a podcast and as individuals if you want to join us in the world of F1 Fantasy and, of
I
course, in our
took mine.
predictions.
I took mine very seriously.
You always do, to be fair, like with your predictions, but you always seem to come out trumps for taking it seriously. So, I mean, it's not to be sniffed at.
I was being sarcastic.
Did you not take it seriously at all?
No.
Ah,
What? Having a team where I think who would have the
I don't
greatest
think he's looked at your
stash.
team. Is the point he's trying to make there? So he doesn't know how seriously you've taken it.
I've named one the greatest mustache as to who I think out of the Formula One drivers could grow the best mustache. Plus Williams because they have two previous championships with drivers with great mustaches. And one of the other ones is Justice for Carlos, but that name had already been taken, so I've had to write it in Spanish. So, and that team is based basically on who I think would back Carlos.
In a fight or
Hmm?
in a fight that they're backing him, or what are they backing
Against
him in?
Ferrari.
Backing him against a wall and just or
No, they have his back. They were the people that as soon as they heard that Hamilton was going to Ferrari,
sent him a sad
their
message.
immediate reaction was to call Carlos up and be like, "You okay, bro?"
Right, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. A brief insight into the inner mind of Ellie Mae Taylor. Details on our fantasy league and on how to compete against us in predictions will be up on our social media feeds. Look through for the posts on our stories. They'll be up on our Twitter feeds as well. So go and look for them there. There'll be a link in the bio if you're on Spotify or YouTube as well. So go and check those out. In the meantime, we'll be back with some feeder series content as well coming up soon, looking at F2 and F3. And in due course, we will be looking at F1 Academy as well once they've announced their final two seats that we're
three.
waiting for. Three, isn't it? Yeah. I forgot that the one today doesn't technically count. Anyway, in the meantime, Thiemo, where can the people find you?
On the Kerbs, Paddock Sorority, Is It Fast? Instagram, pretty much. And also on the Kerbs will have its own fantasy league, which will probably join our fantasy league and vice versa. So it's all muddled there. So if you want to double your chances of potentially doing better, because there may be less in that one, who knows? I never know. We never really know how popular these things are going to be. Take your chance and maybe you'll get something, maybe you won't. That's part of the fun of the risk of the game.
You're risking absolutely nothing apart from maybe 5 minutes of your time each week. Just sort of look at it and go, oh, I did all right. There's no financial gain from this, and there's equally no financial loss, which is more the reason why you should do it. Ellie Mae, where can the people find you?
Nowhere.
Yeah, right.
I'm doing absolute now.
Yeah, well, that's because Race Retro was cancelled. It's supposed to be this weekend, and I got in for my evening run and got a message from my editor going, "We've written 6 pages of a preview for an event that's just been cancelled." I'm like, poo. So that's how my evening went. Was a case of, didn't we just send that to the printers to go to press on Wednesday? Yes, we did.
Raise you up to
Bring it
potentially
back.
watch parts of the Daytona 500 a little bit though, because that got cancelled and moved to today instead and starts in about 14 minutes.
Oh, the NASCAR one.
Mm.
Oh. Well, let's hurry up with this podcast. Let's get this finished and wrapped up, and we can watch the NASCAR Daytona 500. If you want more of me, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok as at Jesse on Cars, and you can also find me writing for Classic Car Weekly. buy our latest issue. I'm driving a very nice Mitsubishi Evo in it, and it's very good fun. We'll be
By our
back
latest
soon.
issue, it's got a whole 6-page spread on a race on an event that isn't happening.
Okay, like some of it is about an event that's not happening, but the auction is still going ahead. The cars that we test drove for the auction are still going to be sold. There are a few bits that aren't quite as relevant as we anticipated, but it's fine. The rest of it, the remaining 64 pages of it, are still relevant. So still pick up a copy, please and thank you. We'll be back with some F2 and F3 preview nonsense in due course. Have a very good evening, unless it's morning wherever you're listening to this with.